Hello, and welcome to the channel. This is the first video of a multi-part and evolving series that I want to make on the history of the Philippine Islands. History is the story of how we got to the present, and I want to explore the key narratives and themes to get to the essence of why the Philippines is socially, culturally, and politically the way it is today. In this video, I will go over 3 key themes to understanding the pre-colonial Philippines. The first theme is the cultural influence of South Asia. The Philippines is one of the only countries in Southeast Asia that was subjected to Western colonization before it had the opportunity to develop either a centralized government ruling over a large territory or a dominant culture. Part of the reason for this is its geography. The Philippines is composed of over 7,000 individual islands, making centralization and integration through means of communication and transportation difficult. Moreover, there are still over 150 different linguistic dialects recognized today. Contact with Chinese traders was recorded as early as 982, and some cultural influences from South Asia, such as a Sanskrit-based writing system, were carried to the islands by the Indonesian empires of Srivijaya and Majapahit. But in comparison with other parts of the region, the influence of both China and India was of relatively little importance. Even though there is clear cultural influence in language and political formation from Indic tribes, the peoples of the Philippine archipelago, unlike most of the other peoples of Southeast Asia, never adopted Hinduism or Buddhism. The earliest recorded documents found in the Philippines is the Ladna copper plate inscription, which was dated to the year 900 and speaks to the Indic influence. It was written in Kawi script, which is based on Indonesian script and predates the Baybayin script prevalent on the islands when the Spanish arrived in 1521. The LCI describes a dead slave gaining freedom from slavery for him and his kin. Further Indic influence can be seen in how its decentralized political units were based on extended kinships called barangays. Towns, or bayans, usually consisted of 4 to 10 barangays. Only in the highlands and mountains of northern Luzon, where elaborate rice terraces were built some 2,000 years ago, were livelihood and social organization linked to a fixed territory. Spanish colonization never reached these highland peoples. The barangay units stemmed from balangays, which were large seafaring vessels in which tribes from Borneo were first brought to what is now known as the Philippines. These individual barangays were often made up of 30 to 100 household units with populations of up to 2,000. However, larger barangays in Manila and Tondo, where trade with Chinese merchants took place, were substantially larger. Within each barangay, the ruling class were called the Majanu, which was headed by a Daiju, or chieftain. His responsibilities included governing his people, leading them in war, protecting them from enemies, and settling disputes. He received agricultural produce and services from his people and distributed irrigated land among his barangay with the right of usufruct, or the right to use another property short of destruction or waste. The larger Majanu class had many slaves and other valuable property like houses and boats. Lineage was emphasized over wealth. Members included those who could claim noble lineage, and members of the Daitu's family. The Daitus who comprised the bayan, or town, selected a leader, or raja. Under the Majanu ruling class, the Taimawa were free people who attached themselves to the Daitu of their choice. They could use or bequeath a portion of barangay land, and rendered services and agricultural labor to the Daitu. Their main responsibility to the Daitu was agricultural labor, but they could also work in fisheries, accompany expeditions, and rowboats. Members included our illegitimate children of Majanu and slaves, and former Alipin, or slaves, who paid off their debts. The Mahalika, or from Sanskrit, meaning man of wealth, wisdom, or competence, were similar to the Taimawa, except they also rendered military services to the Daitu and paid for their own equipment and weapons. They also received a share of the spoils. At the bottom of the social hierarchy were the Alipin, or slaves. Alipin Namame were slaves who lived in their own houses apart from their debtor. If the Alipin's debt came from insolvency or legal action, the Alipin and his debtor agreed on a period of indenture and an equivalent monetary value in exchange for it. The Alipin Namamae were allowed to farm a portion of barangay land, but they were expected to turn over a portion of their harvest to their master. He came whenever his master called to harvest crops, build houses, rowboats, or carry cargo. Members included those who inherited debts from their Namamae parents, Taimao who went into debt, and former Alipin Sajajilid who married or bought their way into Namamae status. Alipin Sajajilid were slaves who lived in their debtor's house and were entirely dependent on them for food and shelter. Male Alipin Sajajilid who married were often raised to Namamae status because it was more economical for his master as opposed to supporting him and his new family under the same roof. However, female Alipin Sajajilid were rarely permitted to marry. Members included those children born in the debtor's house, for example, children of other Alipin and children of parents who were too poor to raise them. Follow various local religions, a mixture of monotheism and polytheism in which the latter dominated. The propitiation of spirits required numerous rituals, but there was no obvious religious hierarchy. In religion, as in social structure and economic activity, there was considerable variation between, and even within, islands. This pattern began to change in the 15th century, however, when Islam was introduced to Mindanao and the Sulu archipelago through Brunei on the island of Borneo. In religious beliefs and practices came new political and social institutions. By the mid-16th century, 2 sultanates had been established in Sulu and Maguindanao, bringing under their sway a number of barangays. A powerful dictator as far north as Manila embraced Islam. It was in the midst of this wave of Islamic proselytism that the Spanish arrived. Had the Spanish come a century later, or had their motives been strictly commercial, Filipinos today might be a predominantly Muslim people. It's easy to take for granted that the Philippines exists as a country. However, as Heidegger has pointed out, we shouldn't underestimate the act of naming a thing in the world toward creating a semantic reality of it. The seedling of the idea of a Philippines nation as we know it today in the consciousness of the people living there began under the Spanish Empire. Although it is worth considering the hypothetical that the Philippines may have eventually become a unified Muslim country or been subsumed under Malaysia or Indonesia, had Spanish colonization never occurred, and although the Spanish were never able to bring under complete political control certain highland tribes in the mountains of Luzon and the whole Mindanao region in the south, what happened in history is that the Spanish did in fact integrate and consolidate the disparate barangays and towns across Luzon, Visayas, and port cities in Mindanao, which were spread across those 7,000 islands, making communication and transportation, and thus any kind of unification under a fixed centralized authority rather than the disparate, decentralized, and fluid barangay social system. The Spanish accomplished this, albeit regrettably and oftentimes through forced relocation. This leads us into the next topic for upcoming videos, the story of Spanish colonization in the Philippines. As we have seen, 3 key themes to understanding the pre-colonial Philippines is number 1, Indic cultural and political influence, especially in terms of the barangay structure of society. Number 2, Islamic cultural influence, especially in the southern region of Mindanao, which largely resisted Spanish colonization and Catholic proselytization and still serves as a religious and cultural counterweight to the rest of the overwhelmingly Christian population of the country today. And number 3, the disparate barangays and bayans were largely consolidated and integrated under Spanish colonization. Let me know in the comments below how much or how little you have read about pre-colonial Philippines. Also, let me know about any topics you would like to see covered in future videos. Until next time.